This is the Body Wise podcast. Thank you for joining Laura and Christina for another intimate exploration of collective wisdom.
Hi, everybody. It's Christina Kerp, your host today for Body Wise podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited about this interview today. But before we get started, I want to remind all of you listening to please remember to subscribe wherever you're listening from, and please leave a review. So it's Mental Health Awareness Month, if I'm not mistaken. That's what I saw on the gram. But really, mental health awareness should be all the time. And I think especially this year, 2020, the doozy of a year that we've had, a lot of people are struggling with their mental health, but it's something which can be pretty taboo in our culture. Seeking help, seeing a therapist, like there must be something wrong with you. And I really want to dispel those myths. I'm a huge proponent for mental health myself, and I've kind of seen different therapists and types of healers over the years, but I was fortunate enough to find someone that I clicked with so much, and it was such a game changer, and someone who gave me these very actionable tools to deal with all the things I was dealing with, present and past. And so I am excited to have Keisha on the show. Keisha is a licensed clinical social worker in the Tampa Bay area whose holistic approach to psychotherapy utilizes modalities that integrate mind, body, and spirit. She is a transpersonal therapist. She's also a somatic experiencing practitioner, and much of her work focuses on trauma-based experiences and reprocessing those experiences to release both emotional and somatic dis-ease. Keisha Sullivan's practice, An Awakened Heart, Psychological Approaches to Mental Health and Wellness, is located in South Tampa, and I was fortunate enough to see her pretty consistently this summer while I was living in Tampa. And when I move there permanently, I will definitely be seeing her regularly because I look forward to our session every single week. She's just amazing. You can contact her via her website, www.therapisttampa.com, or her email, ksullivan.lcsw@gmail.com. We will link both of those in the show notes. So we're going to cover all of the things that Keisha does. I'm sure you guys have questions like, what is somatic experiencing and what is transpersonal therapist? But we're going to cover all that, as well as several questions I got from all of you, which I asked you guys on Instagram, and you sent in some amazing questions. So again, getting that's no taboo, getting questions answered, and hopefully demystifying what it's like to work with a therapist. So let's dive into it. Keisha. Okay, and we're live. Keisha, thank you so much for being on the show. It's so good to see you because I miss you and you're here, and it's like, it's not like I'm in your little womb-like office, but close enough.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. So we got a lot of questions from other audience members, which we'll get into later, but I want you to kind of explain a little deeper of what you do specifically, because I don't think it's the run-of-the-mill therapy. I mean, in my experience, wasn't like run-of-the-mill. And even in your introduction, there's, I think, some terms that people might be like, huh? So if you could explain a little bit more about what it is that you do specifically and like how it's different from typical therapy.
Yeah, and I can't speak to other therapists, but with regard to what I hold intention to do is to go beyond just looking at the mind, approach things from a more holistic approach, because there is a very significant connection between the mind-body approach. And so I want to see how things have created beliefs that people are holding, where it's felt in the body, and with that being said, utilizing specific modalities that allow us to engage that understanding for the person so that they can take that and expand that for themselves on a deeper level and get to really know who it is that they are, versus, what's been identified with and keeps them stuck.
Right. Like the kind of the messages of like life has told you that you're this person and you're living out that role versus who you really are. Kind of getting into that.
Yeah, and life, not only life, I mean, just breaking it down piece by piece. Yeah. People, society, parents, anybody that, you know, we look to who has authority over us. You know, those are the people that we have been programmed by. And as we get older, you know, we find that, you know, we go through different challenges, not necessarily because it's our own input, but it's because of the programs that have continued to be, you know, run within our subconscious mind, that we continue to replay over and over again, you know, and then we find that we hit a brick wall. And that's usually when people start determining, something's not right here. What do I need to do? You know, why am I facing the same challenges over and over again? And, you know, how can I get unstuck, so to speak? You know, let me see if I can talk to somebody and try to figure this out with their support.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I felt that. I think that wall, a lot of us feel that for sure. And that's okay, I can't do this on my own. I need help for sure.
Yes. And, you know, I would say, like, even for myself, you know, and it's funny because when you sit with a therapist, I know my experience before I even got into the field, just going to therapy, you know, you look at a therapist and you think they have it all figured out. You know, they have no problems. They're not even human anymore. They might be levitating because they're giving you all the answers, you know, that you think that you're needing. And it's not like that. You know, it's that this is a shared experience, and it's a collective experience. And we all go through similar challenges, you know, that seem to pop up at designated points, you know, that kind of awaken us to the next step that we need to take. Yeah. So it's not that I know something that you don't know. It's just that, you know, we're really helping each other reflect the areas that we can help one another grow with and through. And I think that that's important. So, you know, when I do speak with people, my intention and my goal is to be collaborative, because it's not that, you know, I'm up here and you're down there. You know, we are together in this. And, you know, I mean, if I'm on another part of my journey, it's because I've done work in a different way, or I've addressed something, you know, but that makes me even better at being able to assist you.
For sure. Absolutely.
So that's the difference, I would say. That's the difference.
Gotcha. Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing. So what does transpersonal therapy mean? Like, what is that?
So really, I mean, simply, it's a branch of psychology that really just looks at the full person, the wholeness of the person. It's going beyond, you know, what we identify with in terms of our personality. It's looking at the mind, body, and spirit, and really covering the whole essence of the person, so that those pieces, those parts that may have been split off, can be reintegrated for the healing that's desired on all levels. Because, you know, I know many people have different beliefs, but I mean, we really are spiritual beings, you know, so we want to come to an awareness of the truth of who we are on that level, to kind of then work with, you know, the lower parts of ourselves, the smaller self, the egoic self, and, you know, get that to work with, you know, that higher essence of who we are, so that that is directing the ego versus the ego running amok and directing us all the time. Right. Which is a big issue, a big issue, because, you know, there's so much programming.
Right. What are some like characteristics of like when the ego's in charge? Like, you know, is it like defensiveness or insecurity, or, you know, what would someone be like? I don't know. I guess it manifests differently in other people, right? In different people.
Yeah, it does. But, you know, again, like I said, this is a collective experience. So, you know, a lot of us, you know, can identify with what comes up because we share it, you know, issues of shame, you know, when the ego feels threatened, the ego's purpose is really to, and I don't want to vilify the ego, because the ego can be really helpful, but what's most important is that we're in control of how it functions, and we befriend it in a way that allows it to work with us versus working against us. You know, so the ego has many positive aspects, but the bottom line is that, you know, when we feel a sense of threat, you know, the ego gets really concerned about that, because it wants its power, and it really wants to control situations and outcomes on its own. So it creates crisis, so to speak, so that it can then also come up with its own solution on how to solve that crisis. And in doing so, where am I in all of that? I'm sitting back, just going along with it versus having a part in what's taking place, so I'm not really at a place where I can affect change as much as the ego is taking over and doing that on my behalf, so to speak.
Right.
And so its purpose is not to be annihilated, not to have to concede to a death. And so it really causes you to believe that it has all the answers and that it will take care of you. And that's a very functional piece, because it has taken care of us in so many ways. I mean, it's all about safety, right? So as children, there's parts of us that developed, egoically to keep us safe, and like, for instance, a good example of that would be just the way that we have learned to suppress our feelings, which is a big piece of the work that I do, is kind of coming back to understanding, well, what is it that I feel and where am I feeling it? Being taught to suppress your feelings, an example may be, get over it, or it's a big deal, or, you don't have a right to your feelings, basically, becomes a problem. And that creates stress, because that really goes against who we are and doesn't allow us to come to a space where we're okay to feel and move through those feelings, so that it doesn't become settled in and so traumatic, so to speak. So it becomes problematic when we're not able to feel and we've closed down to that. And that's a big problem with many of us in society. It's just learning how to get back to the idea of it's okay to feel. And goodness, what is it that I freaking feel? I don't even know what I feel. I don't know what to feel. Is it okay that I feel this?
Right.
Am I crazy?
Right.
I mean, all these pieces come in, and it makes it difficult to really get a handle on what's going on for me,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that as a society, we've definitely put a taboo on a lot of feelings, or like, it's like we're failing if we're having these feelings. And so we kind of have to be okay. Like, my neighbors and I were talking about this the other day. And it's like, everyone keeps saying, I'm fine, we're fine, everyone thinks fine. Like, no one's fine.
Yeah, and that's such a generic answer, which is the problem. It's kind of like saying to somebody in passing, how are you? Like, nobody really cares. So when that question's being asked, you're not even looking at the person and saying, how are you? It's just like, and the response is, a habituated response, I'm fine. Because if I stop and really tell you what's going on for me, will you even care? And I don't even know what's going on for me, because I'm just, on this wheel constantly going, and never check in with myself to know if there's something wrong, or even to know if there's something right.
Right.
That's the other piece of it, that's the other side of it. Many times there's so many good things, so many things to really celebrate in terms of the changes that are being made, even on the smallest level. But if you don't take time to recognize what's going on, you don't even celebrate that for yourself and take time to acknowledge and honor where you are at this point of your journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got to celebrate those wins for sure.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That's
Awesome.
love. That's love. That's really a function of self-love, because I'm taking the time to tend to myself and, really see who I am.
Right.
Who am I becoming? What am I?
Right. Instead of always being the critic, I think we're just conditioned to be our biggest self-critic, and it's so much harder for us to practice that self-love, to celebrate the wins, to notice that, hey, I'm crushing that, or I'm doing better, or so for sure. That's awesome. Thanks. So you also do hypnotherapy, and that's very interesting.
Yes. Oh.
Because I feel like that's something that in movies is portrayed a certain way. And so that's what I think of, like the movie portrayal of hypnotherapy. So tell us more about that. Like, how does it work? Who's it for?
Something, here's the thing that I think a lot of people don't recognize is that, really hypnotherapy it allows you to get into the subconscious mind so that you can really understand the program that continues to run. And people don't recognize, really, hypnotherapy is just a trance state. It's a state of relaxation so that, you can go beyond the thinking mind and ease in gently into understanding what's really there and what's taking place, because it becomes mystifying. You know, a lot of people don't recognize what's going on for them because we're always like this instead of really being in a state of relaxation to check in. And when you can relax and check in, that's when you're really opening up your channel, you know, to receive, you know, different ways of dealing with the challenges, you know, that we face. But that's very hard to do when you are not in a relaxed state. So really, it's just a state of relaxation. It's very much so the state that that you experience when you're in that phase right before you drift off into sleep. That's the state. That's called a theta state. And that's the state that really allows us to access, you know, those parts of ourselves where the hidden beliefs are, so that we can go in and change the programming, change the experience, you know, from that point. So most people are in a trance all day long, and you don't even recognize it. We don't even recognize it. You know, we're just somewhat dissociated, and the program is running and the habits are going. And you know, it's kind of like when you're reading a book, you know, when you're really into a great book and all of a sudden it's like the time has passed and you're like, oh my gosh, how did I get so far into this book? That's a trance state. Okay. When kids are looking at their iPhones and their computers, you know, that's a trance state. And that's why advertising is similar, you know, because in that relaxed trance state, your mind is really open to suggestion. Mm. And so that is why all of a sudden you have a need to, you know, maybe eat something, you know, that you wouldn't ordinarily eat. You know, maybe I have a craving for popcorn now because I saw something that popped up in my view, you know, and is causing me to want to do that. You know, so it's important to really understand, because, you know, especially when you talk about children, you know, the first 7 years of life, you know, we are downloading all the information before we get online to become conscious, which just comes around at the age of 7, you know, so you're downloading all of your observations and your experiences from your parents or from any caregiver, you know, that is around your environment and part of your care. And that becomes the program. Again, that's not your program. That's a program that's running based on somebody else's good parts and bad parts, so to speak, which becomes a part of the way that you then function in your life, and find down the road that, oh my gosh, you know, there's some stuff going on that I'm not understanding how to navigate. Right. You know? Wow. So really it's just being able to go in and to change some of the beliefs and the behaviors in terms of how you show up in the world, so that, you know, it's kind of like a malware in your computer. You know, you want to clean up that hard drive in order to allow for something new to come in, something more beneficial, something more desired, so that you can live the life that you're really wanting versus somebody else's programming getting in the way.
Amazing. Actually, there was a reader question, and I want to ask it now before I forget, because I forgot to write it down in my notes. Mm-hmm. But she asked about therapy, like for children, like at what age or when, like, how do you know when it's time, if you're when your child is struggling, you're like, okay, it's time to seek help? And like, are there specific like child therapists, or is there a certain age where it's like appropriate or inappropriate? Like, would it be before or after 7? Do you have thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. That is such a big question. And I say it's big because there's many answers to that. You know, one of the things that I think is important to be aware of is that, you know, a lot of the things that become trauma, so to speak. And I want to say that, you know, trauma is subjective, right? We experience it differently. And because of that, it shows up differently based on, you know, the characteristics that people, you know, within their personality. So what's traumatic for me may not be traumatic for you, but nonetheless, you know, it needs to be validated. And, you know, with that being said, there's many levels of trauma that I think a lot of people, just in general, because we haven't been taught or exposed to, aren't even aware of, and some of those traumas don't happen when we're here already. Some of those traumas happen in utero. There's a lot of birth issues that take place, before we even arrive, that impact personality, and what could happen potentially in terms of the way that things show up symptomatically. So it's important to recognize that piece. And I say that because, you may just be looking at, if somebody's coming to therapy or having their child come to therapy, they may be looking at, oh, well, Sue is just acting out, and being very resistant to, complying. And it's like, okay, well, we just can't say, okay, well, let's talk about what's going on for Sue. I mean, we really need to piecemeal it and look at the total sum. And this is where the transpersonal piece comes in, right? Looking at the whole of the experience. So I want to know from mom, what was your experience like during pregnancy? How was she born? What was her labor like? What did that feel like for you? Because that's a symbiotic relationship taking place between mom and child. Mom has a role to work, and so does child or baby, infant in that process. So now if you're adding medications, drugs to induce labor, all these things, they play a factor in terms of what may be showing up down the road. And people just don't recognize that, and that's my concern, even with the medical model. Its place, but it's important to recognize that there's things to be able to add in support of a person other than going to medication first.
Right.
We want to understand how the body's functioning and where it's holding the trauma, and understand the whole of the experience and give it time to understand, versus 15 minutes and then saying, okay, this is your diagnosis. Here, take this prescription and good luck. To really understand a person and what they've gone through, what they're experiencing, and addressing it, through that lens.
Right.
So in answer to your question, I know that was a long-winded piece, but in answer to your question, it really depends on where they're at and making sure, where the child is at, and really making sure that you're seeking the appropriate support for them. There's all different kinds of modalities that are helpful in working with children. There's play therapy. One of the modalities that I am a little biased to and partial to would be somatic experiencing, because it's really helping the child do something that they're already familiar with that may be in the process of already shutting down, which is going into the felt sense. I love this quote from Gabor Mate, who says, it's trauma's not what happens to us, it's what happens inside of us. And that is it. It's not what we think of the trauma, it's how the trauma is stored and it's felt, because when it's not felt and it's not released and it doesn't have the opportunity to be addressed, then you find yourself many different things that go on within the physiology that show up, and not recognizing the connection to the mind and body and how that's even come into being.
Right. Absolutely.
So it really depends. It depends on what's going on, but the other piece too, I would say to that question, is that it's so important. I think that there's this identification with parents, and it's an old way of being. It's a very antiquated way of being because it's generational. Of, well, I'm the mom or I'm the dad and you're the child. So you do what I say because I know better, and that's something that I really caution parents to be so careful of, because there's a balance in that. There needs to be structure with that. But most importantly, there needs to be collaboration with your child, because your child, has the capacity to really express either through something that they can communicate or through what you can observe if you allow yourself to be in tune with your child and see what is going on for them. You know, allow them to speak. However you can engage that with your own five senses. Allow them to speak to you, and that's going to help you to understand what's best for them. Don't think that you know what's best for them, because, you know, even though they're your child, their experience of what is going on for them is their experience, you know, and it's not going to be the same as yours was. And it's not fair to impose that on a child either, you know,
Right.
because that's what shuts them down. You know, when we make our experience their experience,
Right.
and
I
then
think
that puts them into a role.
right. I think that happens so much where, good parents, but it's like I did the best I could. It's what I knew. And that's always kind of at the cause of so many of, especially those instances where there is this experienced trauma that's not something,
Mhm.
traumatic, like as other people would describe it, but the child experienced that it was a trauma for them. And those things are kind of the things that are, I guess, not caught early on or not acknowledged, and then kind of come up later in therapy when you're like 35 years old. um,
Right, right. You know, and it's true, because, you know, one of the things that is often difficult for me is that, you know, a lot of a lot of um, therapeutic modality, you know, so it's like solution focused therapy, which has its place again.
right.
You know, but the idea is, what's the issue? And so let's talk about, you know, it's going to be goal oriented, and we're going to put things in place, you know, that you can do right now that'll assist the problem. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, that's putting a band aid on a bullet hole, you know,
Right.
because it's like, we're going to keep experiencing this, and it's not going to be helpful in the long run, because we're going to keep experiencing this and we haven't gotten underneath what created that, what caused that. And again, it's not to stay stuck in what created it, but I think it's important to have an understanding conceptually of what has taken place, so that you can then move from that space and make the connections as to what's going on now, you know.
Right.
And when I sit with some people, it's hard, because they're like, well, what does what happened at 5 have to do with what's going on? I'm like, oh my God, you know, there's a lot that has to do with it, because
Mm.
back there, that part of you created an understanding of how to survive your environment, you know, and there was beliefs that have formed around that, influencing your behavior, your choices, making it so that you don't have a choice, because what informed you then is carried over to now, you know. And it's like, so yeah, there is an importance, you
Right.
know. And I also understand that, you know, some people, that's too much for some people. And so, you know, I always say, I'm not for everyone. You know, I'd love to help everyone,
Right.
but, you know, I'm not for everyone, because, you know, it's important that people start where they're at, and I want to meet them there, you know. And if they're not ready for what it is that I have to offer, then I need to make sure that you at least get what you need from somebody who can offer that to you at exactly where you are, because you deserve that.
For sure. That's actually a great.
Yeah.
I want to segue into another question we got from a reader that kind of touches upon that, and about how do you know, like, how do you, like, are there keywords? What do you look for when trying to find a therapist that's right for you? Or do you have to go through the 3 to 4 sessions, kind of like the interview, the dating, to find
Mm-hmm.
out? I think some people like don't have the bandwidth to do that, and they just kind of like, is there a way to vet, what should people look for?
Yeah, that can be tricky. And I say that because here it comes back to the idea of, right, the felt sense,
Right.
and getting in touch with our intuitive nature, the knowing part of us that, you know, is online and clear, but that we kind of like disregard or aren't able to see. You know, similar to, like, an example would be, you know, when you walk into a room and somebody's been arguing, like, there's a sense that something has gone on. You know, you may not be exactly clear on what it is that's taken place, but energetically you're feeling something, you're attuned to something, you
Right.
know. And that's good if you're able to really listen to it and allow that to inform you as to, well, what do I want to do next based on what I'm feeling, you know, what I'm sensing. Do I want to stay here and be in this room? after there's been an argument that's taken place, because energetically I can feel that and it doesn't feel good. So you want to use that knowingness and, use it in your interactions with people. What is the sense when I call up, somebody, a therapist? What is the sense I'm getting in terms of how it feels to be able to interact with them? Does it feel comfortable for me? Does it feel like I'm being heard and that they understand what it is that I'm trying to say? Does it feel like they care? Are they giving me time to just, not go into a long story, but to express myself in a way that they can reflect, yeah, this is something that I can work with. And, this is something that we can, move through at some point. So just really being in tune with, what is it that I'm feeling when I'm engaged with somebody? And again, not easy to do, but something that absolutely can be done if you allow yourself to get in touch with that part of yourself. And we're doing it all the time. We're always, feeling something from somebody that we're interacting with, but it's about then using that information and taking the next step with it based on what feels right for you.
Right, for sure. I know I experienced that where I kind of saw someone for a while and it never felt like great. I don't know. Then I showed up and then I felt weird, like canceling, and I don't know. And it was never fruitful. It was, but yeah, if I think back, I'm like, for sure, from day one, I kind of had the, like, my spidey sense was like, this isn't a good match. But so we just have to really.
I want to say, it's interesting that you interpret it that way, because that is really fruitful because of the information that you received in contrast, which showed you, this is not what I want. And that's just as important as finding the person that you want. Recognizing this is maybe not something good for me, or I don't feel comfortable with this. That's valuable information.
True. Very true.
So not being careful of the judgments, we got so many judgments that come in, that we miss what's actually going on with us in the moment, that's giving us information that can take us to the next step.
Right. Again, not always solution based, like always focusing on the end game, but the experience as well. For sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to ask another reader question. So someone asked about PTSD. Like, what is it? What are the signs? And they word it as, can it be healed? Which I know it's like, well, I don't know if that's the right terminology, but that's what they asked. What it is, and can it be healed?
And I think that's been asked, that question has kind of been asked to me on several occasions. And, when that's asked, the question that I ask in response is, what do you believe?
Right.
Because belief is powerful, right? That's the programming again. So do you believe that what you've experienced can be healed? That's the question I would want to pose to that person, because then it becomes the power of your belief that's going to allow for the healing that can take place. Because not only do you believe that you can be healed, but you believe that I can assist you in that process.
Right.
And if that's the case, what's happened there? You're open, you're ready to receive your healing. You're ready to receive your healing. It's not because, again, I know something you don't know. I'm just a facilitator in that process. So, in the bigger picture of things, yes, I believe trauma can be healed. I think that to some extent, there will be a memory of it, but again, that's not the important piece. It's about, the charge associated with that memory, how we are able to work with it when whatever comes up, and allow for a different way of being in terms of how it's experienced, because that within itself becomes the healing. That is the healing, not allowing it to overtake us, that we're in more control, and control being that, not that we're using force, telling ourselves this isn't happening, this is not real. No, that we're really using the power within us, and that power lies in the ability to work with what's coming up based on, again, observing it from a sense of feeling. Where is that located in my body? What is it that I'm experiencing, and what is the meaning of that, of that experience? And it's just little pieces, that we can work with that allow us to move through what it is that's trying to, keep us stuck from the past, because it's really, again, physiology, what wasn't complete within that physiology, if, let's say, something happened to me where I was, let's say, God forbid, I was in a situation and somebody, tried to sexually assault me, and, I was able to get away. There's going to be a difference in that experience for me because I was able to get away, because I'm completing the response. For a moment, the person looked away, I got up, ran. That's going to be different than somebody who didn't have the capability of being able to work through the response, somebody who shut down, somebody who had to dissociate and go into a freeze response and didn't complete the fight or flight. And that's what comes up when you talk about trauma. It's very visceral. It feels like, oh my God, this is happening right now. And it's important to differentiate, which is what somatic experiencing, supports, to differentiate, even though this is coming up right now, is there safety here? Because I am safe right here, right now, but my mind is taking me back. My psyche is taking me back to a situation that feels like it's happening now. So you want to be able to work with, with the mind and the body around what's being experienced, so that you can move through it. And once the body is able to complete through that response, it allows for a different outcome. Instead of running from it, you're able to contain space for the experience in a way that allows you to receive the message that it yield.
Right.
Which is tricky, because, again, coming back to the idea of, we don't take time to see what it is that we're feeling, and we're so afraid of what we're feeling that, there's such an avoidance and a resistance that we're off doing something.
Right.
We're either in anxiety or in depression. Anxiety being the future, depression being the past, but there's never a space cut out or carved out for presence.
Yeah.
Being here right now and seeing what is, and allowing yourself to take in what you're experiencing right in this moment versus needing to be somewhere else.
Right. Yeah.
So it's retraining yourself.
Awesome.
Refocusing of the attention.
Okay. So thank you. That was a great answer. We have another question, and this is, sort of also in terms of anxiety and depression you just talked about, which I love, that the future and the past makes perfect sense. A postpartum doula asked the question, but I think this is any parents listening would benefit from this. Postpartum depression and anxiety, I think, are so much more common than we talk about, because there's always a new baby, you're so excited, and you have this little bundle of joy miracle. But parents often mothers deal with this grief of the life that was, as, let's say, as a spouse or a postpartum doula. What are some signs that we should look out for that postpartum depression?
Again, what is the felt sense? Here's the thing, right? There's already an understanding that something doesn't feel right, and what you're coming up against is the idea that, again, with the role, oh, it's a new baby, I should be, there's the operative words, I should be feeling this way. Shame on me for not feeling, this joy and this excitement. Shame on me for focusing on myself and being selfish because I'm not here instead. So that within itself is a problem in terms of the identification of what you should be doing or where you should be versus where you are, And so, for me, when I hear about that in particular, when you talk about postpartum depression, for me, it raises a flag in terms of grief. And I'm wondering, because, again, there's a thread of something that's coming up that's attached to something else in the past that is not conscious. And that's a great place for hypnotherapy, right?
Mm,
Because now you'll be able to get into the subconscious mind and understand, well, what is the connection there for me?
right.
And now that I understand that, how can I go into this experience and create, a new understanding, new beliefs, and new conclusions that take me out of that space and into, where the truth lies, the truth of who I really am, because these are all, perspective is everything, I say, but it's also nothing at all. That's the duality of perspective. It could be everything or it's nothing. And
Right.
so it's important, to really identify what the perspective held is. Where is it coming from? Which allows us to then work in a different way with it and shift it for the healing.
Okay. Okay. So true. I think that that's such an important piece that not isn't talked about enough. It's like, why is it like the should feelings? It's so true. That's what's even the cause of why there's even the terms like, like that.
Yeah.
And I think that guilt, goodness, the
Yes.
guilt.
Yeah. Those should feelings I call the shit feelings.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
what they are as far as I'm concerned.
They
You know,
are for sure.
it's horrible because it's such an imposition that we put on ourselves, and that speaks to something else that I love, which is authority issues,
Yes.
right? And so here's the thing, I can speak personally, I have an issue with authority because it's always been so imposed upon me and didn't allow me to have my own sense of self-efficacy. Always having to be told what to do and never having a voice to speak what was true for me became problematic. So anybody that was in a role of authority over me, I had a resistance to. And thank God I've done a lot of work to, work around those feelings and see where it's coming from. But I think a lot of us, have had that imposed upon us. That's a collective experience. And here we do it to ourselves now. We take what we've learned, the programming, and we then impose up. So why is it that, when we tell ourselves, oh, you shouldn't be eating this, is that, I mean, we're gorging it, we're attacking it, we're buying bags of it, and we're just taking it in,
Right.
or whatever it is, whether it's food, whatever it is, it doesn't even matter. It's just the issue is impose an authority over ourselves in that way that really takes away from our capability to do things in a different way, because it reminds us of, the authority, the authoritarian person in our lives or people in our lives who disempower us. And that keeps us in a victim position,
Right.
and that's why we don't follow through and stay stuck. So it's about working with yourself in a tender way, in a compassionate way, and finding another way to speak to yourself, using language in a different way with yourself that helps to motivate you to want to do those things that are important to you versus imposing that upon yourself.
Right. Right. Awesome.
Yeah.
So we have like two more questions from readers, but I also want to go over Trim Life really quick because I think it's really interesting. So let's go over that first, and then we'll finish off with the last two questions just because I'm going to go back and forth. But in your practice, you offer Trim Life. It's a hypnosis approach for weight loss, but I'd love that you talk about our agreement to food, which I think you just kind of just give us a glimpse of that just now. So can you explain to us that like a little more, because that's fascinating.
Yeah, well, Trim Life, oh, it's a beautiful program that's used at the Cleveland Clinic, and there's so many components of it that I really love. But it's a group process, I like to limit the group process to 6 at a time, so that it's really intimate. But it really allows you to understand what your agreement has been with food, because it's not about diets. It's
Right.
about lifestyle change. But even beyond that, it's about really understanding where your agreements with food developed. And it's so crazy because, most times it's so subtle. It is so subtle, and it brings me back to, and I think I shared this with you once, it's just this idea of, not eating all my food. And then my mom saying, well, there's kids in Africa starving. And it's like, oh, so what is that? That's guilt. guilt because you're not eating your food, and shame on you because there's no gratitude that you have food to eat.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay. Something so simple like that gets imprinted in the subconscious mind. Remember, the subconscious mind is your hard drive. It's your computer's hard drive. And so everything that you've ever seen, experienced, any person that you've ever engaged with, all that stuff is stored there. And it tells you how to then act and behave. It informs the way that you act and behave and the way that you show up in every aspect of your life. So that little imprint becomes compounded upon as you hear it more and more and more in different ways. It doesn't necessarily always have to be the same thing at the dinner table. Oh, there's children starving in Africa. Now it's like, oh, so it was that day. And today it's, oh, I cooked this big meal and, you don't even want to finish it. Do you know how hard and how long it took me to cook this?
Right.
So another compounded experience. So then what happens? Just with that little piece, there's shame there, obviously, right? And what will I do with that? It could show up symptomatically in terms of me having an eating disorder. And when I say eating disorder, I'm talking about both sides of that pendulum. Right. Whether it's an eating disorder that I'm overeating or I'm undereating, or become bulimic, anorexia, gorging. And how does that show up? Well, maybe I am, doing it in a hidden way. I'm hiding food, or maybe it is that I won't eat in front of people because I'm trying to avoid any type of judgment or criticism. There's different ways that it shows up symptomatically. Maybe I become enraged with my child now because I recapitulate the experience that comes up for me, when I'm watching them reflect that in our relationship. Mm-hmm. Why aren't you eating all your food? There's so many homeless people who would love to have this meal right now, so it shows up in so many different ways, and there's so many different nuances to it. But it's about getting into understanding the agreement in a really thoughtful way and through hypnosis, so that you can understand what is stopping the progress that you're really wanting when this shows up for you. When I'm at a point that I just, I'm finding myself weighing, this weight, and I can't get off these last few pounds, or, I can't stop myself from overindulging, whatever it is that person is experiencing, we get down to the root of it as a group. And it's so beautiful because being able to share in that experience with people who have similar experience is healing, because now we're connecting. Now we're building community. Now we're understanding one another on a different level and seeing our connectedness instead of seeing the differences that, criticism and judgment, get in the way and create that, that barrier for. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So just feeling like you're being able to be heard and share and understand somebody's experiences is also helpful to you in your own process of growing. Very so we use different things within, that 6-week program. We do meditation, we do mindfulness, what I love, this is just so powerful. We have a mastermind towards the end of the 6-week program because now the group has really bonded with one another, and there's a level of safety in that. We build a support around what it is that we want with our goals, and having other people within our group that can help hold us accountable for what it is, and lead in that direction through support of what it is that they can support us with, for the next step that we're wanting to take. So people form a mastermind group within that, and we determine what it is that you want, how are you going to get it, and what will that look like. And so now it allows me to take a step back and just offer any support that I can, but now it's the group healing one another and helping one another in that process as they continue on. And this continues on after, the 6-week program with Trim Life. Awesome. So now they've built really nice, solid connections with people who care enough to want to support their process.
Beautiful. That's awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it's those messages they're so ingrained. I mean, having Cuban parents, like for us, it was when we were in Cuba, we didn't have food. There's kids starving in Cuba. Like growing up with parents who had food scarcity, like that 100% translated it into be grateful for your food. You have to eat all of it. Like,
Mhm.
you know, just and I get it. Again, it's the way they showed love. Like, with your grandmother, it was so funny. It's so like Latina grandmother. It's like, and I think that's not just Cuban,
Mhm.
but most Latin grandmothers. It's like they stuff you to the gills every single time, and if you don't eat everything, you're offending them. However, the minute you gain 5 pounds, they're the first to tell you "tan
Oh,
gordita," and you're like, "What? Here, it's because of you." It's
I know, exactly, exactly. And here's the thing with it, right? I mean, that's all fear-based.
right,
It comes back to what we were talking about in terms of somebody else's fear and them imposing that on you
right.
because they haven't worked through it and they don't even recognize that it's there.
100%. They don't. Yeah, but that's awesome. I think that's such a great program and that's wonderful. And that lasting connection, having that group, that's really what kind of seals the deal. Cause again, you have these people to lean on. So that's so awesome. Very cool.
It is. And
Okay.
it's helpful. I want to just say too, it's helpful because in those connections, there are things, I mean, in the group connection, there are things that really become unveiled
Right.
that so many people aren't aware of,
Right.
within what's happened. There's
For
things
sure.
that come up, into consciousness quickly because you're aware of it. Oh yeah, I remember my mom saying this, that, or the other. But no, there's things that come up that again they weren't aware of, a memory all of a sudden of something or a feeling of
Mm,
something. And that is the catalyst for, oh, now I get it. That's the aha moment that moves to the next step. So yeah,
beautiful.
powerful.
So powerful. I love that. Okay, one more question. I think was it two? Was one? I think the last two are kind of together. So I'm gonna wrap them into one. So when do you know it's time to part ways with your therapist and work with someone else? Like you've been seeing someone for a while. This reader says thus far it's been fine, but things are shifting in my personal life. Her specific example is that 2020 with the intense politics of the year, and this person, is a person of color and feels like their therapist doesn't understand that side of them and kind of gives them I guess she feels that the response she gets is that all people face challenges, kind of like generic, and she doesn't feel comfortable with that. So she feels like it's time to move on. So how would like I guess how
Mhm.
do you do that? Like I guess how do you break up with your therapist is the question.
Well, here's the thing, right? There's something that I would want to evaluate before that I come to that conclusion.
Right.
And what you just said in that question triggers for me this idea of, again, there's a piece of gold in this, in that I want to know what happens for me when I feel like I'm not getting my needs met.
Right.
Do I run? Do I break up? How am I working? Because again, how's the programming working around what it is that I'm about to do? Now, I'm not trying to dismiss or invalidate what, the concerns were with that question, but I want to evaluate what happens for me that then causes me to act and behave in this way. Because I want to know, is this the freaking programming that's coming up again? Am I being tricked? Because there's a piece there that if I can recognize that, well, then guess what? Now I want to take this back to my therapist, or I want to, hopefully my therapist, can explore this with me and question that
Right.
and not, enmesh with me to say, yes, okay, well, I guess that I'm not giving you, because again, we're human, right? So, there's a possibility to personalize that and
Right.
say, well, yes, fine. If I'm not giving you what you need, then, maybe you need to go somewhere else. And this is a learning for both the therapist and for the client.
Right.
But I would want to question, what goes on for me when I experience this? Is this something that I usually do that's going to alert me to my pattern? And
Mm,
hopefully, like I said, the therapist is helping you to identify this.
right.
Um, you know, but there also is that piece in that maybe I'm not getting, what it is that I'm needing anymore. And how do I know? How do you feel? How do you feel? You're already telling yourself something that does not feel right. So
Right.
if I understand that about myself, and I really do feel I'm at a point where we've come to the end, that's okay. And you know what? I would hope that your therapist encourages that, because that means that there has been significant growth and it's time for another teacher to come into your life by
Yeah.
closing this door. And how beautiful is that? That we've shared this time together and walked this path together, offering something for your highest good, and you can take that with you and build from it. That is beautiful.
For
That is
sure.
beautiful. So there's nothing wrong with that.
That
That's
is beautiful.
very important. It's important to recognize when it's time to leave. And that's another tricky piece, because many of us do not know how to leave with grace.
Mm.
Either avoid, I'm going to cancel the appointment, or come up with excuses. I don't like the way she treated me this day. She said something I didn't like, or whatever it is.
Right.
Using excuses instead of recognizing, okay, if I'm going to leave, how am I going to do this? And that's important to understand, because like I said, a lot of times we don't know how to leave. So we use tactics that are in the programming that allow us to continue doing things that aren't good for us and don't allow for the teaching that we're needing to move past that way of being.
Right. Right. I
Yeah.
love that. Well put. It's true. Leaving with grace. I think oftentimes, even just saying no, or saying this is no longer serving me, it's something that I think all people, but I feel like women, just specifically, since are so bad at, like, we really struggle with that, because the programming usually has been like to comply, be nice.
Yes. 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 And that's the thing, when you're complying, you're complying for somebody else's benefit, which is leaving you feeling a certain way, and you're not really learning how to really be in power, in your own true power. And there's so much power, again, in saying no. I freaking love it. I love it when people say to me, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not like, well, what do you mean you don't want to do that? Like, good. How does it feel to say that? Because this may be the first time that they actually said that. And I got them to that space that caused them energetically to get so frustrated, or whatever it was, that they said no to me. And I'm like, yes, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Right.
It's not about resistance. It's about allowing somebody to really feel who they are. And in that moment, saying no is important. And it was important enough for them to do that with me. And I honor that. That's a beautiful, beautiful step in the right direction for them and for what it is that we're looking to do together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Amazing. This has been so great. Thank you so much for coming on the show and bestowing us with your wisdom. I think it's been so insightful. And I know the listeners have gotten a ton out of it. If you're listening from the Tampa Bay area, and I'll be just, check Keisha out, her information will be in the notes. So the website, your email. Thank you again so much. And I hope to see you soon. I'll be back eventually to Tampa, I hope.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and allowing me this forum to just share my thoughts and feelings and reach people in a way that I'm hoping touches them, whether it's for me or for somebody else, that they really understand the importance of what it is that's necessary for their own growth, and that they engage that, because we all deserve that. We all deserve that, and that's the first step to loving ourselves, noticing ourselves and our needs. So thank you for allowing me to speak.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. You know where to find us. You know where the show notes are. And we'll see you next time.